Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when Hollywood legend Clint Eastwood, known for his no-nonsense grit, walks onto the View stage and finds himself face-to-face with Joy Behar over one of the most relatable debates in modern life? Whether phones, tablets, and screens are destroying family gatherings. What starts as a light-hearted conversation about holiday dinners quickly spirals into a fiery generational clash. Clint, blunt and uncompromising, insists that families are losing their soul when everyone's glued to a device instead of each other. Joy fires back, arguing that technology connects families just as much as it divides them, especially for younger generations who live their lives online. The studio audience gasps, laughs, and claps as the tension builds. Whoopi tries to mediate, Sunny adds her legal-minded insights, and Anna chimes in with her own cultural perspective. But nothing can stop the collision between Eastwood's old-school grit and Behar's sharp-tongued modernism. And by the time the conversation reaches its boiling point, Clint Eastwood will have delivered one of the most unforgettable moments ever caught on The View. The opening applause was louder than usual, and with good reason. Clint Eastwood, dressed in a dark suit with that trademark squint and gravelly half-smile, strode slowly but confidently onto the View stage. At 94 years old, he carried himself with the same calm, unshakable presence that had defined his career for decades. The audience leapt to their feet, giving him a standing ovation before he even said a word. Whoopi Goldberg rose from her seat at the table, arms open. "Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Clint Eastwood." Clint gave a curt nod, raising a hand in acknowledgement, his voice dry and clipped when he finally spoke. "Appreciate it. Now let's get this shirkus started." The crowd roared with laughter, and even Joy Behar cracked a smirk. But beneath that playful jab, there was already a hint of what was to come. The introductions were warm, full of reverence for Clint's long career, but Whoopi wasted no time pivoting into today's topic. "Clint," she said, leaning toward him, "we're talking today about family gatherings, especially during the holidays, and whether technology, phones, tablets, all that, should be limited or even banned at the dinner table. What do you think?" Clint didn't hesitate. "I think it's common sense," he said bluntly. "If you're sitting at a table with your family and everyone's got their head buried in a phone, you don't have a family gathering. You've got a bunch of people staring at glowing rectangles." The crowd chuckled at the phrasing, but Clint wasn't smiling. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowed. "You want to know why families don't talk anymore? Why kids don't look their grandparents in the eye? It's because they're too busy taking selfies or scrolling through nonsense." Joy tilted her head, her lips already pursing. "Oh, come on, Clint. This isn't the 1950s anymore. Families don't all live down the block from each other. Technology is how a lot of people stay connected. My grandson, for example, half the time I see him, it's on FaceTime. That doesn't make me less of a grandma. It makes me a grandma who can actually be in his life, even when we're not in the same room." A ripple of applause came from one corner of the audience. Clint turned toward her, his brow furrowing. "FaceTime's fine if you're across the country, but when you're in the same room, put the phone down. Look at the person next to you. Families used to talk, share stories, argue even. Now everyone's too busy checking their notifications to notice the person across the table." The audience gave a supportive cheer, though not as enthusiastic as before. Joy raised her eyebrows. "You sound like every grandpa yelling, 'Get off my lawn,' at the neighbor kids. Times have changed, Clint. The phone is part of how younger generations communicate. You can fight it all you want, but you're not putting that genie back in the bottle." The laughter this time came more at Clint's expense. and his jaw tightened ever so slightly. He sat straighter, his voice cutting through the room. Maybe the genie needs to go back in the bottle. Maybe what's changed isn't progress, it's decline. That line landed like a thud, the audience gasping at the directness. Whoopi quickly stepped in, raising her hands. Okay, let's keep it cool. Clint, you're saying technology ruins connection. Joy, you're saying it can help connection. Let's dig into that. Sunny Hostin leaned in, her tone measured. There are studies showing that family dinners are linked to better mental health, better grades for kids, even stronger bonds. But those same studies show that when phones are out, the quality of conversation goes way down. So Clint has a point there. Joy, not missing a beat, shot back. Sure, but you can't just ignore the reality we live in. What about kids who live with divorced parents or grandparents who live thousands of miles away? Without technology, some of those connections would be lost completely. Clint let out a low chuckle, the kind that was more scorn than amusement. Sounds like an excuse. If people really cared, they'd show up. They'd make the effort. You can't replace being there in person with some pixelated version of yourself on a screen. The tension rose a notch. The audience clearly divided. Some clapped at Clint's no-nonsense approach, while others booed lightly at what they saw as an outdated take. Ana Navarro, who had been quiet so far, finally jumped in. Clint, I love you, but let's be real. My family spread across Cuba, Miami, Colombia, you name it. If we waited to all be in the same room, we'd never see each other. Technology doesn't replace real connection, but it makes it possible when geography gets in the way. Isn't that worth something? Clint turned toward her with that famous squint. Sure, Anna, but when you finally do get together, what then? You gonna spend the whole night showing each other TikToks, or you gonna actually talk? That drew laughter and applause even from those who disagreed with him. Whoopi, however, leaned forward, her tone sharpening. So what's your solution, Clint? A big basket at the door where everyone dumps their phones? You want to play sheriff at Thanksgiving dinner? That's not realistic. Clint's reply was immediate. Maybe it is. Maybe if someone had the guts to say, we're here for each other, not for Instagram, families might remember what it feels like to actually talk. The applause this time was thunderous, the audience torn between admiration for Clint's old-school bluntness and Joy's more modern practicality. Whoopi cut in before things could boil over. All right, we're just getting started here. We're going to dig into this because clearly it's hitting a nerve. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. The cameras panned out as the audience cheered, some standing, some shaking their heads. Clint sat stoically, unflinching, while Joy shuffled her cards, already plotting her next retort. The battle lines were drawn, and everyone knew the clash had only just begun. The debate quickly shifted from polite sparring to something heavier, something personal. Clint Eastwood leaned back in his chair, squinting toward the audience, as though measuring the weight of every word he was about to drop. You know what's funny? Clint began, his gravelly voice cutting through the chatter. When I was a kid, family gatherings weren't perfect. There was bickering, burnt food, uncles who drank too much, but you know what we didn't have? Heads buried in phones, pretending the room didn't exist. People actually looked each other in the eye. You felt seen. That's disappearing. The audience hummed, a mix of agreement and apprehension. Joy Behar wasted no time leaning forward, flashing that sharp, knowing smile of hers. Clint, I hate to break it to you, but family dynamics didn't suddenly fall apart because somebody's nephew brought an iPhone to Thanksgiving. People were distracted back then, too, by newspapers, TV, work. Technology isn't the villain here. It's just the scapegoat people like to use when they can't accept change. The audience clapped in support, but Clint just smirked. Change, Joy, is supposed to improve lives, not cheapen them. Now Whoopi Goldberg interjected, trying to balance the scales.
But Clint, don't you think for some families technology actually helps? Like my grandkids can't always travel. FaceTime is how they talk to their cousins. Without it, they'd barely know each other. Clint nodded respectfully, but didn't back down. I'm not against it altogether. I'm saying when you're finally in the same room, phones ought to be put away. That's sacred time. These days, people spend more effort capturing a fake moment for Instagram than actually living the real one. That line landed hard. The applause came in bursts, people shifting, some clapping louder than others. But Joy wasn't about to let Clint take control of the stage. Okay, but Clint, who decides what's sacred time? The kids, the parents, or you? Because forcing rules at a family gathering sounds like unity. It sounds like control. Maybe instead of policing phones, families should work on their actual relationships. The tension thickened. Clint leaned forward now, his voice low but firm. Respect is the foundation of any relationship. And when a child, or even an adult, chooses to scroll through TikTok instead of listening to their grandmother tell a story, that's not a strong relationship. That's disrespect, and we shouldn't normalize it. The audience split again, some nodding along with Clint's old-school take, others cheering Joy's defiance. Sonny Hostin tried to steer the middle ground. I think Clint has a point. My family has dinners where we say no phones at the table. It's not about control, it's about valuing the time we have together. Once you lose people, you realize how rare those dinners are. That softened the room for a moment, but Joy pounced back. But Sonny, it's not 1950 anymore. Young people socialize differently now. Sometimes posting that group photo on Instagram is their way of showing love. It says, this moment mattered enough to share. That's not disrespect. That's connection in today's language. Clint shook his head slowly. No, Joy, that's performance. That's for strangers on the internet, not for the people in the room. Love doesn't need an audience. The crowd gasped, and even Joy's smile faltered just a bit at the raw bluntness of Clint's words. For a beat, the set was quiet except for the murmurs of the audience. Then Joy fired back, her tone sharper. That's rich coming from a man who's made his entire life about an audience. Every smile, every cowboy squint, it was all for the cameras. And you want to lecture families about being authentic? The arena erupted. Some booed, others clapped. Even Whoopi put her hand on the table and muttered, "Oh boy," under her breath. Clint didn't flinch. He leaned in, looking Joy straight in the eyes. The difference, Joy, is that I knew the camera wasn't my family. I never confused the two. When I went home, I put the character away. These kids today, they live in the camera. They don't know where their performance ends and their life begins. The weight of his words pulled the room into silence again. The audience wasn't sure whether to clap or think. Sarah Haynes, trying to ease the tension, asked softly, "So, Clint, what would you do? You host Thanksgiving. Do you ban phones at the door?" Clint didn't hesitate. "Damn right. Everyone drops the phone in a basket. You want to check it? Go outside. When you're at my table, you're present, period." The crowd roared with applause, some in admiration, others just stirred by the drama of his boldness. Joy rolled her eyes dramatically, waving her hand as if dismissing the whole idea. "That sounds like the quickest way to make sure nobody comes back next year. Families don't need rules, Clint. They need freedom. You keep pushing this my way or nothing attitude, and you'll find yourself eating alone." That line landed hard too, sparking oohs and murmurs across the studio. Clint tightened his jaw, clearly stung but refusing to show weakness. He finally said, voice calm but edged with steel, "Better to eat alone than to sit surrounded by people who'd rather be somewhere else." The air froze. Even Joy, for the first time, seemed at loss for words. The clash had escalated from a debate about phones to something deeper, a battle about respect, legacy, and loneliness. The audience knew this was no longer just a conversation. It was a showdown. The question now was, who would break first?
The tension in the studio was no longer just sharp, it was cutting. Everyone could feel it. Clint Eastwood's last line hung in the air like smoke from one of his old Western revolvers. Better to eat alone than to sit surrounded by people who'd rather be somewhere else. Joy Behar leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, eyes narrowed in that familiar mix of defiance and mockery, but for once she didn't fire back right away. The silence was thick enough that the audience started murmuring, restless and unsure whose side to take. Finally, Joy broke the pause. "Clint, do you hear yourself? You're basically saying you'd rather push your family away than meet them halfway. That's not strength, that's stubbornness. Families don't survive on ultimatums, they survive on compromise." Clint tilted his head, his jaw clenched. Compromise is fine when it's about dessert or where to sit, but when it comes to respect, you don't compromise on that. If my children or grandchildren can't put down a piece of glass for 2 hours and look their old man in the eye, then maybe they don't value me as much as they say. That stung the audience. You could hear scattered applause, but also gasps. The word value echoed in the space, hitting nerves for anyone who had ever felt overlooked at a family table. Sonny Hostin leaned in gently. "Clint, isn't it possible that their way of valuing you looks different? You're imagining respect as silence, presence, eye contact. But for some kids, snapping a photo and posting dinner with grandpa is their way of showing the world they're proud of you. Isn't that love, too?" Clint sighed, his hands folding together on the table. "Love shouldn't need an audience, Sonny. If you're proud, show me. Don't show strangers." The audience applauded, but the applause was split, hesitant. Some clapped fiercely, others shook their heads. Joy leaned forward now, sensing the opening. Her voice rose sharper than before. "Or maybe, Clint, you're just afraid. Afraid of being forgotten. Afraid that once the phones come out, the attention shifts and you're no longer the center of the room. Maybe this whole rant isn't about respect. Maybe it's about control. Maybe it's about you." The studio gasped, loud this time. Whoopi actually smacked the table, her eyes wide. "Joy!" But Joy didn't stop. She pressed harder. "You've spent your whole life commanding respect as a Hollywood legend, but now you're older, and the world doesn't revolve around you the same way. And instead of adjusting, you want to drag the world back to your comfort zone. You don't want family, you want an audience." The face on Clint didn't change much, but you could see the flicker in his eyes. For a man known for his composure, that flicker was like a storm breaking through. He leaned forward, his voice deep, slow, and raw. "I buried both my parents, Joy. I've sat at those tables knowing it was the last time I'd hear their voices. You think I wanted to grab a camera? You think I cared about showing it to the world? No, I wanted to remember the sound, the warmth, the silence. I wanted to be there. And now I see a generation more concerned with documenting than living. If that makes me old-fashioned, fine. But don't you dare call it fear." The studio went dead quiet. Even Joy's usual confidence seemed shaken for a moment. His words weren't just sharp, they were personal, dripping with memory and grief. The audience erupted in applause, long and loud, some even standing. But Joy, unwilling to lose ground, came back softer this time, almost biting her lip before speaking. "I hear you, Clint, I do. But you're projecting your grief onto everyone else. Not every family dinner is someone's last. Sometimes capturing a moment is a way to hold on, too. My daughter takes pictures of me constantly, and I roll my eyes. But you know what? Someday, those pictures will matter more than I can imagine. To her kids. That's not disrespect. That's love too, just expressed differently. The audience clapped for that, warmly. Clint gave a small, almost pained laugh. Maybe. But if your daughter spends all of dinner behind the lens instead of across the table, what memory is she really capturing? An image or a connection? That's the difference, Joy. And someday, when we're gone, they'll wish they put the phone down and just listened. For the first time, Clint's voice cracked slightly. Not much, but enough for the room to hear the weight behind it. This wasn't just an argument. It was a man staring down the fear of irrelevance, of silence, of loss. The camera zoomed in. The view had turned into something rawer than anyone expected. Sarah Haynes finally broke in, softly. It sounds like what we're really talking about is fear of losing each other. Some of us cling to the moment, some of us capture it, but both come from the same place, love. The studio gave her a gentle round of applause, but everyone's eyes stayed locked on Clint and Joy. Joy shook her head. Love isn't one size fits all, Clint. You can't force your definition of respect on the next generation. They'll find their own way of connecting, and if you keep fighting it, you'll push them away. And then you will be alone, not because of phones, but because of pride. Clint's hand tightened on the table. His eyes burned with something deeper than anger. It was defiance mixed with hurt. He leaned forward, his voice slow, like gravel breaking. Or maybe it's pride that keeps me demanding more. More eye contact, more presence, more real connection. Because if we stop demanding it, if we settle for screens, then family becomes a hashtag. And I won't accept that. The crowd erupted again, this time a thunderous mix of cheers and boos. The debate had split the audience down the middle, seniors nodding fiercely with Clint, while younger viewers clapped for Joy. The emotional flashpoint had been reached. This wasn't about technology anymore. This was about memory, mortality, and what families owed each other before time ran out. And everyone could feel it. Something was about to break.
The studio was a powder keg. The audience, the co-hosts, even the camera crew seemed to sense that the argument had reached a dangerous edge. The polite laughter that usually colored the view was gone. What filled the space now was raw electricity. Years of generational frustration and cultural tension embodied in two voices refusing to bend. Clint Eastwood, sitting stiffly in his chair, leaned forward as though he were about to step into one of his old movie showdowns. "Joy, you keep talking like respect can evolve, like it's some passing trend. But respect doesn't change with time. It's not a fashion, it's the bedrock. And when families forget that, they forget who they are." Joy Behar shot back without missing a beat. Her tone was sharp, almost cutting. "And you keep talking like your way is the only way. That's arrogance, Clint. You think you're holding on to tradition, but what you're really holding on to is control. You want kids and grandkids to fit your mold, to play by your script, but they're not extras in your movie. They have their own lives." The crowd reacted in a mix of gasps and cheers, the divide now palpable. Older audience members applauded Clint's words, while younger voices whooped at Joy's defiance. Whoopi Goldberg tried to step in, holding out her hands. Okay, y'all, we need to breathe for a second. This isn't a courtroom, it's Thanksgiving dinner. Let's not flip the table." But Clint wasn't easing up. His voice cut through her mediation like steel. "If the family table feels like a courtroom now, Whoopi, it's because respect is on trial. And Joy here seems happy to defend neglect." Joy's eyes widened at that. Neglect?
Are you out of your mind? I spend time with my daughter and grandson every chance I get. Just because she takes a selfie during dinner doesn't mean she loves me any less. How dare you call that neglect?" Clint's voice rose, uncharacteristically loud. "Because when you're too busy taking pictures, you're not really with them. You're curating a memory, not living one. And by the time you realize the difference, it's too damn late." The words cracked through the studio like thunder. The audience gasped, some clapping fiercely, others shaking their heads. Ana Navarro, who had been mostly quiet, now jumped in, her voice sharp with exasperation. "Clint, come on. You're romanticizing the past. Families weren't perfect 50 years ago either. People ignored each other then, just in different ways. Don't act like cell phones invented distance. They didn't." Clint turned to her, his eyes cold. "Maybe not, but they perfected it." That line hit like a gunshot. The crowd roared, half cheering, half booing. The split in the room felt like a chasm now. Joy leaned across the table, her voice fierce. "You're scaring people into your worldview. That's not wisdom, Clint. That's fear-mongering. You think shouting about the good old days will make people change? It won't. You sound like a bitter old man, not the wise figure you think you are." The insult landed hard. Gasps echoed through the studio. Whoopi closed her eyes and muttered, "Oh, Lord, Joy!" Clint froze, his jaw tightening. For a moment it looked like he wouldn't answer. But then, slowly, he leaned forward, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of a man unwilling to be dismissed. "You call me a bitter old man? Fine, I'll wear it. But if being bitter means demanding that families remember what real presence feels like, then I'll be bitter until I die. And you," he pointed across the table at Joy, his finger trembling with rage, "you'll be the one who explains to your daughter why she's got 1,000 pictures of you but can't remember the last real conversation." The audience erupted. Some people actually stood, applauding fiercely, while others booed loudly. The noise was deafening. Joy slammed her hand on the table, her voice shaking with fury. "Don't you dare bring my family into this! Don't you dare! You don't know me, Clint. You don't know the love in my house. How dare you drag my daughter into your lecture?" The atmosphere was chaos. Whoopi was leaning back with her hands up, visibly frustrated, while Sarah looked stricken, and Sarah Haynes shook her head like she was watching a slow-motion car crash. Clint didn't back down. His voice lowered, almost whispering, but every word was sharp. "I don't need to know your family, Joy. I know what respect looks like, and I know what it doesn't. And right now, you're defending a generation of people who think family time is background noise for a screen." Joy shot back, her voice trembling now, but not from fear, from anger. "And you're defending a fantasy that never existed. You think kids in the 50s were all sitting around the table in perfect silence, worshiping their parents? Please, families were broken then too. At least now, kids are trying to stay connected in their way. You just can't see it because it doesn't look like your way." The audience gasped again, some clapping, some booing, the noise almost drowning her out. At that moment, Clint pushed his chair back. The sound of it scraping across the floor cut through the chaos. The camera zoomed in on him as he stood up, his towering frame still carrying the presence of the cowboy, the enforcer, the legend. The audience went silent, sensing something seismic. Joy pointed at him, her face flushed. "Oh, what, you're going to storm off now? That's real mature, Clint, real classy. Preach about family, then walk away from the conversation like a child." Clint turned to her, his eyes blazing. His voice dropped to a growl. "Maybe that's the lesson your generation needs to learn." The audience erupted. Some people actually stood, applauding fiercely, while others booed loudly. The noise was deafening. Whoopi was yelling now, trying to calm things down, but Clint was already walking. The cameras caught every step as he made his way across the stage, refusing to look back. The crowd was on its feet, half applauding him like a hero, half jeering him like a villain. Joy sat frozen, fuming, gripping the table with white knuckles. The breaking point had been reached, and Clint Eastwood had walked away.
The studio sat in stunned silence for a long beat after Clint Eastwood left the stage. The camera followed him until the heavy studio doors swung shut behind him, leaving nothing but the echo of his words hanging in the air. The audience was buzzing, half in awe, half unsettled, as the co-hosts tried to recompose themselves. Joy Behar adjusted in her chair, her cheeks still flushed. She let out a sharp exhale, then forced a laugh. "Well," she said, "I guess Clint really doesn't like selfies." A ripple of laughter broke the tension, but it was nervous, uneven. Whoopi leaned forward, her voice calm, but weighted. "That man's been carrying convictions for decades, and tonight we all got to see what it looks like when the old world collides with the new. I don't agree with everything he said, but I respect that he believes in it enough to stand or walk on it." Sonny Hostin chimed in softly, almost reflective. "This is what makes the conversation hard. Technology connects us, yes, but it also isolates us. Families are figuring that out in real time. Maybe Clint was too harsh, but he hit a nerve, and that's why everyone in here is reacting so strongly." The audience murmured, nodding, some clapping lightly in agreement. Joy shook her head, still simmering. "I just don't like being told my love for my family is any less real because I don't live it's like it's 1955. Respect isn't one size fits all." Anna Navarro reached across, giving Joy a supportive pat. "And maybe that's the point. We don't all define family the same way anymore. That doesn't mean we're losing it. It means it's evolving." The audience applauded, the tension breaking into a softer hum of agreement. As the segment drew to a close, Whoopi addressed the viewers at home. "Whether you were clapping for Clint or for Joy tonight, you can't deny this. Family matters. How we show up for each other matters. Maybe the question isn't about screens or silence, but about being intentional in whatever way your family needs." The closing shot captured the panel seated, still visibly shaken but united in reflection, while the audience gave a standing ovation, half for the fireworks they'd just witnessed, half for the raw honesty of the moment. On social media, the clips of Clint's walk-off were already trending, captions flying. Eastwood schools the view. Joy Behar fires back at Hollywood legend. Old school versus new world. This wasn't just a debate. It was a cultural moment, one that left everyone, on stage and at home, questioning how much time we spend on our phones and how much time we really spend with each other. And with that, the credits rolled.